evening, everyone. I'm Gretchen Crosby Sims, the Executive Director here at the Institute of Politics. We are pleased to welcome former Congressman Tom Davis and Steve Israel for a special preview of the upcoming midterm elections this evening. A special thank you to both of them for being IOP Pritzker Fellows this quarter at the IOP. We look forward to their conversation tonight with Caitlin Huey-Burns. A quick word about voting. You are here because you are interested in the elections that are coming up, and we at the IOP believe that voting is the most fundamental responsibility and privilege that we all enjoy in our democracy. This fall, a group of students has launched a push to increase voter turnout, nonpartisan push to increase voter turnout on campus. And if you'd like to make sure that you're registered or find a nearby polling place, you can go to their website at ushivotes.com. The nearest voting place for one more day is here on campus at Reynolds Club. You can vote there tomorrow from 10 to 5 if you're registered in Chicago. Again, that's ushivotes.com. A couple of upcoming events I want to mention. On November 12th, we will be unpacking the results of these midterm elections with Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. You can find out about this and other upcoming events on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. We will have audience questions after our moderated conversations, so the mic will be in which aisle, right? I think in the center aisle, yep. The first three questions should come from students, please, and we remind you that a question ends in a question mark. We ask you to please put your phones on silent. If you need restrooms, they are downstairs. And now to formally introduce our speakers is Peter Donos. Peter is a student at the Harris School of Public Policy. He is from Wadsworth, Illinois. This year, he has served as a Fellows Ambassador and the team lead for our visiting fellows, including Congressman Israel and Davis. Please join me in welcoming Peter to the podium.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. Once again, my name is Peter Donos, and I'm a second-year master's student at the Harris School of Public Policy. This quarter at the IOP, we've had a lot of fun with the two gentlemen sitting on the stage here, Congressman Steve Israel and Tom Davis. And I'm excited that you'll have the opportunity to hear from them tonight, just 5 days before the midterm elections. In the final week before Election Day, what are the important races to watch? Which campaign strategies and messages have been the most surprising or the most effective? Will the so-called blue wave of Democratic victories flip control of the House of Representatives, or will support for President Trump's agenda preserve Republican control of Congress? Tonight, we will have the opportunity to hear from our two experts. Congressman Steve Israel formerly represented New York's 2nd and 3rd congressional districts for 16 years. He also chaired the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee from 2011 until 2015. His insights appear regularly in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, among others. Congressman Tom Davis formerly represented Virginia's 11th congressional district for over 13 years, as well as chaired the National Republican Congressional Committee from 1999 until 2003. He currently serves on the Board of Partnership for Public Service, is rector at George Mason University, and is president of the Federal City Council, a Washington, D.C. business organization. Finally, our distinguished moderator this evening is Caitlin Huey-Burns. Ms. Huey-Burns is currently a political reporter for CBS News. She formerly served as national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, as well as covered Capitol Hill for RCP, where she reported on a variety of subjects, including the federal budget standoffs, gun legislation, immigration reform, and midterm elections. Now, without further ado, let's please welcome Caitlin Huey-Burns and Congressman Steve Israel and Tom Davis to the stage.
Here we are.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody is registered to vote and is voted or is going to vote. We're only a few days away, so it's really exciting to actually have this conversation with votes actually on the horizon. So the theme of tonight is this question of, is a blue wave coming? So I kind of want to start with that to kick off this conversation. The way that I've been looking at these midterms, it seems to be possibly a tale of two elections. We have a House map that very much favors Democrats at this point, and we have a Senate map that very much favors Republicans. So we have the best experts here to help break this down, and so I kind of just want to start off with that question first. Is there a blue wave coming? Second, What are the districts that you think will help determine this outcome?
Well, I guess I would start by saying this is not a traditional wave election. It's kind of a realignment, reaffirmation election of plates that have been moving the country in a divided fashion for a long time. So I think you'll find you're in a blue wave if you're in a suburban upscale district, highly educated area, anywhere near with density. We used to say anything within 20 miles of a Whole Foods, you're probably right there in the middle of it. But if you're out there with the Cracker Barrels, it's probably going to stay a red wave. I said this one place, and the lady said, "Don't you mean crate and barrel?" And I said, I rest my case. It's a very divided country, and the Senate map is a much more rural oriented electoral base. But Republicans are going to have, I think, be very disappointed in anything urban in a year like this, and that'll lead to Democratic gains. But it's more a realignment than it is a wave.
Look, a wave lifts or sinks all boats. What is different, what is unique, and perhaps even unprecedented, Caitlin, about this election is that for the first time, there is no real alignment between House races and Senate races. Usually, in a wave election, you have House races that overlap in Senate campaigns that lift or sink House races. If you look at the battleground map, it's all over the place. You've got competitive Senate races where you have no competitive House races. You have competitive House races where you have no competitive Senate races. So I don't see this as a traditional wave. I see this more as a cycle of cyclones. I think you're going to see in different media markets these cyclones kind of take hold and disrupt the battlefield. The final thing I would say about this is that in this kind of environment, we have data on the generic polling and the president's fave and unfave. In this kind of environment, traditionally the Republicans could expect to lose 50 or 60 seats in the House of Representatives. It's not going to be anywhere near that because the Republicans did an absolutely phenomenal job of taking control of redistricting. They built in 2010, 2012. They built seawalls that built to survive this kind of wave, which means it may just be, it's not going to be a wave because those seawalls will preserve some Republican districts, and Democratic gains, while I believe my party will win the House, they're going to be limited because of Republican successes with redistricting.
Also, just note, Democrats live on top of each other in these urban enclaves where they actually waste votes, whereas Republicans are a little bit more spread out. Somebody said, so what's your guidance to Democrats? I said, I don't generally give advice to Democrats.
And we don't take it. And we don't take it either, I just want you to know.
But if I did, I'd say they need a massive relocation program, just because they waste their votes in these areas. So the generic ballot, even without the gerrymandering advantage that Republicans, it favors them in most states, not Illinois. But in most states, you have these demographic, what we call residential sorting patterns that tend to favor Republicans.
We do have a massive relocation program. The Republicans passed a new tax reform that took away all our state and local tax deductions, and all my constituents are now moving to other states.
Well, I think you brought some slides that kind of help us see what this battleground looks like that we're talking about, because we are talking about, I would say, 60-ish districts, right, that are true kind of battleground districts.
You want to take a look? We have one slide that. Oh, you want to do your counties first?
Let me do three.
Sure.
So the green counties are counties that voted for Bill Clinton in '96, but by 2012 were voting for Romney. And you can see the migration of the Republican Party pre-Trump was already moving from the country club to the country. These yellow counties, like my home county of Fairfax, more urban, upscale counties, were already moving in the direction. Trump understood this, that the old Republican alignment that elected Bush 2 and Bush 1 was no longer really the party coalition. The party base had been migrating. Second slide. Trump added these counties to the base. These red counties are Obama counties that Trump added. Notice where they are. This was his appeals on trade. They were already culturally aligned with the Republican Party, but they were heavily unionized in many cases or had, if you will, populist antecedents. The blue counties, like Orange County, California, which hadn't voted for a Democrat since 1936, Fort Bend County, Texas, Tom DeLay's old congressional district. Three suburban counties, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Henry around Atlanta, upscale suburban areas where you had a migration of minorities out there and higher income former Republicans moving in the opposite direction. In the final map, this is what we're dealing with. This was the Clinton-Trump map. Republicans controlling 83% of the real estate. Democrats getting the bulk of the votes, but in the wrong places. And as you look at the Senate map, you could take a look at this and you see what the Democratic problem is in the Senate races this year. That they're basically fought in Trump country. But Republicans that are in these urban enclaves, these have been moving into the Democratic column. And with Trump, he's kind of put an exclamation point on that.
And we can just take a quick aerial look at the battlefield. Right now, about 71 competitive districts in the country. This is remarkable. When Tom chaired the NRCC, at about this point, he had 30 districts that he was thinking about when he went to bed every night. When I chaired the DCCC at this point, I had maybe 20 districts.
You know, 20
that I was looking
20's
at.
closer a week out.
Yeah. Okay, so we're both zeroing in about 20 districts. You've got 71 competitive districts. Now, the reason that Democrats are favored in the House is because of those 71. Democrats at most, I mean, I have to struggle to figure out what are the 7 Democrats who are in trouble. I actually think it's more like 2 or 3. But the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is worried about 7. And Chairman Stivers at the NRCC, he's worried about 64. So you've got 7 Democrats on defense. You've got 64 Republicans on defense. That's a pretty good map for Democrats in the House. Go to the next slide. Tom and I agree on many things. We agreed on many things when we were in Congress, by the way. We agree. We were like
both representing upscale suburban districts, right?
We're like 2 former opposing football coaches who've retired. We're like doing color commentary on ESPN now. That's what we're about. So we agreed on and continue to agree on 2 things. And a midterm election is fundamentally about 2 things. Number one, it's a referendum on the president and the president's party. Historically, there have only been 3 occasions where the president actually picked up seats. Every other midterm election since the Civil War is a referendum on the president and the president's party. And you take a look at the president's fave, unfave, 42.8% fave, 53.5% unfave. That's pretty rough for Republicans. And then the other thing that is, final slide, is, whoops, we have one on the generic? No, sorry. Okay.
It's the same.
It's about the same. So the generic right now, and that's the question: if you're voting, would you prefer a Democrat or an unnamed Democrat or an unnamed Republican in the House of Representatives? The Democrats have about a 7.5-point lead. That is enough for the Democrats to take back the House.
Can I make one other point? So 35 of the last 38 midterms, the president's party has lost seats. 3 reasons for that, and then we can talk about what those elements are this year. One is when presidents win, they usually bring people in on their coattails. Those members aren't there in the midterm. The president isn't there in the midterm, and you lose those seats. Or I like to put it this way. President Obama had Obama-centric voters. They weren't there in 2010. They weren't there in 2014. Right. There are Trump-centric voters out there. Are they going to show up or not? That's a question. And he's trying to gin them up. You can see as he goes around, and maybe some of these Senate races he will, but in the House. Secondly, the intensity is traditionally with the out party. We've seen Democratic intensity in a lot of special elections this year. We saw it in the Virginia off year last year, just through the roof. Democrats crawling over broken glass to get to the polls. Republican intensity has been down. That is now close to being equal. Republicans have come close to equalizing it and have a lead right now in the early balloting. But the third factor, and this is where the Republicans have problems, independent voters generally use this opportunity to put a check on the president rather than giving him a blank check. And independent voters, as Republican intensity has picked up and as the rhetoric has picked up, you're driving away some of these independent voters. One other fact, in the last 3 elections where a president's party has controlled the presidency, the House and the Senate, 94, 2006, 2010, the House has flipped, and the losses have been exaggerated. So those are macro factors we factor in as we start looking at predictions and what's likely to happen.
So on that note, what's really interesting to me looking at the president's approval rating is that it's low, but the economy is good, at least on paper. The president, and I've been covering campaigns across the country for the past several months, a few of them are talking about the economy, but most Republicans and the president, under the direction of the president, talking about things like immigration and other items. Democrats, of course, talking about healthcare. Why is the economy top of mind this cycle? And why don't these numbers match up, this approval rating,
It should be.
with the way the economy is looking
It should
right now?
be, but President Trump won't allow it to be. So President Trump is trumping the economy. And so when he appeals to his base, when he tweets incendiary messages, when he makes himself the star of the show in a referendum on him, people forget how strongly the economy is doing. And so I'll tell you, I think President Trump has been the DCCC's most effective messenger in this cycle. We don't want him talking about the economy. We lose.
Look, I think the economy helps Republicans. It allows them, in some cases, it'll keep some Republicans, protect them even though their voters don't like Trump. It baffles me as well why they're not talking about this, because this was kind of his signature as he was going into office, that he was going to help pump up the economy. But my experience has been good economies help. Think of what President Trump's numbers would be if the economy was in the tank right now. I mean, I think that he's performing about where he can, maybe go up a little bit, but it's the economy is what's keeping him afloat. If the economy collapses, it raises a whole other set of issues for the Republicans. So it's not hurting him, it's helping him on the margins. I don't think we can forget that. But it's these social issues, if you will, these cultural issues that drive the Trump coalition. A lot of commentators miss this and talk about the hollow out economy. That's a piece of a whole oleo of cultural issues of people who have felt neglected for a long, long time. And we're seeing these populist movements around the globe. This is not unique to the United States.
It is interesting. I mean, the president's closing argument is on immigration.
Right.
Obviously, talking about birthright citizenship this week, and talking to Republicans on the campaign trail, they're really absorbing that message, and it appears to be a top concern for them. So my question is, is this where the Republican Party is right now? Is this a winning issue for the Republican Party longer term? It seems like the president feels like it is for this particular election in terms of bringing out the voters that Republicans will need.
Yeah, I always felt they'd be better off getting this off the list and go on to some of the economic issues. Having said that, when the argument about immigration becomes ripping babies from their mother's arms, we lose. But when it's about a horde of 10,000 people from Honduras descending on the California border, we win. And I think that at least is what the president perceives it to be. And so that's why he's kept that going at this point. And it seems to be playing particularly in the Senate races in these more rural states.
Look, I think that this midterm is a referendum between anger and fear. The Republicans, in my view, are animating their voters by talking about a caravan, talking about chain migration, talking about birthrights, and that's always been an effective card to play. What's different about this midterm is that the Democrats have learned how to message to emotion. Democrats generally, here's the difference between Democrats and Republicans in messaging. Republicans message to the amygdala, they message to emotion. Democrats message to a 42-point plan. They message because they believe voters are reasonable. Voters are not reasonable, they are emotional. It is why Republican messaging is always better. What is different now, Caitlin, is that for the first time, Democrats are messaging to emotion. They're messaging anger. What's propelling Democratic intensity in this midterm is fired up college-educated women. That is what's propelling Democratic energy across the country. They are angry. They were angry the first day after the inauguration. They're still angry. Democrats are messaging to that anger. Republicans, to get that intensity up, Donald Trump, to get that intensity up, is now talking about caravans and talking about immigration issues. Finally, what really intrigues me about this debate over immigration and caravans is one of the soft spots for Democrats in this midterm and others is that we continue to underperform with Latinx voters. So even though you're talking about caravans, and even though you've got all this rhetoric and hyperbole about these, horrific disease-spreading people coming to invade our borders, it's not backfiring on President Trump and the Republicans with Latinx voters in districts where there's a significant portion of eligible voters.
Yeah, I was just in Miami last week covering a couple of those swing districts, and it was very interesting how obviously the Hispanic vote is not a monolith, we know, but very mixed reactions to that, which makes me wonder if Democrats need a better response to the way in which the president's talking about immigration. I want to also talk about health care, because I hear it over and over and over again from voters that is a top concern. We have it in our CBS polling, especially among those college-educated women. It was something of 70% said that health care was their top concern. But it's so fascinating because we covered 2010. You guys were in the thick of it. And that was a referendum on, in large part, on the president, of course, but on Obamacare. And now we have a completely different dynamic in which Democrats are on the offense on health care, and you have Republicans talking about in ads all across the country talking about the need to preserve pre-existing conditions. What happened here? How did this shift to be something that this dynamic that we see now?
Well, first of all, I think whoever's disruptive on health care is a loss. Obamacare was disruptive. It helped a lot of people, but there are people who had satisfactory health care. They got thrown up in the air, and a lot of questions. The quote that we got to pass it to find out what's in the bill didn't help. So I think when you're disruptive, I think that's helpful. So I mean that hurts your party. So when Republicans start repealing Obamacare on some of the things that had now taken hold with the electorate, you talk about pre-existing conditions and the like, that was then disruptive, and I think that came back to harm them. If you watch Republican ads, they're being on offense on health care for Democrats who are saying they want to go to Medicare for all or something like that, because that in itself is disruptive, at least in the end. That's the argument. That's the line of argument. So I think right now Obamacare is settled in where it's people are like it, they're satisfied with it, and being disruptive I think is harmful.
2 points. One, if you were to ask me, and maybe you were planning to ask us, what's the one message shock in this midterm? What's the one message that I never would have expected going into this midterm? I would say that Democrats may win the House on Obamacare. Nobody ever saw that coming. And I'll take you behind the scenes very briefly. Polling in competitive districts across the country, starting about a year ago, healthcare started popping in the top 3 of voters' concerns, and nobody anticipated that. I think the reason for that is very simple. There's a difference between giving something to people that they may not want and taking it away. When government takes things away from people, they get really angry. And so I think the Republicans overplayed their hands with dozens and dozens of repeal and replace. That was the narrative. Tom is right. Obamacare began to settle in. People were comfortable with it. And he's right again in saying that disruption, I think, really riles people, which is why this issue continues sustainably to kind of float at the top of most polling.
It also seems to be a response to the good economy, right? So Democratic candidates that I've talked to say, yes, the economy is good, but people are still very concerned about their health care, about the rising cost of health care, about prescription drug costs. And so there still seems to be a lot of anxiety around it. So it's interesting that whatever party is trying to shake it up, I think takes the blame.
Yeah, but just to understand, this is still, to a great extent, a referendum on the incumbent president.
Right.
And although the president's job approval ratings are high, his personal ratings are down several points from his job approval ratings. And voters who are angry are going to use their member of Congress, even if they like him, as a messenger to send a message to the president and to try to put some guardrails on the president. That isn't true just for Trump. That's traditionally true what we see in midterm elections. But I think even with this good economy, that message seems to be coming through that the voters are sending.
And kind of on that note, since we are in the Midwest, what's really interesting to me this cycle is, when we looked at the map after 2016 and kind of started to look at what would be competitive in 2018, you have a lot of Democrats up for re-election in the Midwest and some Rust Belt states that the president won, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. a few districts in Minnesota, Ohio, obviously. But Democrats seem, at least in the Senate races and the governor's races, to be doing pretty well in these areas that are kind of transferred over to Trump in 2016. I'm wondering, is it a response to the president, the dynamics that you were talking about? Is this something that is longer term? Is it just in 2018? Interested in kind of what we're actually seeing here in the Midwest.
Well, first of all, Republicans have overperformed in the Midwest in these governor's races, and they've had, in many cases, 8 or 12-year runs, and that's what you get sometimes. You accumulate a lot of flies the longer you're in office. So I think in these Midwestern governor's races, Ohio is still very competitive. Michigan looks to be gone. Wisconsin's tight. Minnesota's likely to stay a Democrat. As you look, Illinois is likely to flip. Indiana's not up. Iowa's in a close race. But look, governor's races are on a different rhythm than what you see nationally. I think this is just the cycle you see. In terms of the House races, there weren't that many Democratic incumbents in Trump districts. So they're really, Republicans have overperformed on the House races nationally. That's why their margins have been so big. So you're going to get some natural recession from that. And I think we're seeing some of that too. Not as much in the Midwest, except in these high-income suburban areas where you have some Republicans that are in trouble.
And I think that there is a local element in some of these races. So I use as a case study Minnesota. So you've got 2 Democratic districts, 2 Republican districts in Minnesota that are competitive. What I find fascinating about the currently held Democratic districts, one is on the Iron Range of Minnesota, currently held by a Democrat, Congressman Rick Nolan. It's now an open seat. President Trump is popular on the Iron Range because of tariffs on imported steel. So I believe that my party will lose that district. But in a district closer to the Twin Cities where you have a lot of soy farmers, that's another Democratic district, I think we're going to hold it because the president is less popular because of his policies on soy and the impact of those policies on soy farmers. So it's to a certain extent, although this is a nationalized election, you can't discount the local dynamics that are going on. I think Minnesota is a perfect case study of that.
Also in Minnesota, you've got 2 suburban Republican districts.
Right.
One is particularly
both Republican.
Wayzata and Edina in the higher income district. Looks like it may flip to the Democrats, and they may lose the 2 urban districts. The exception to this is Iowa, and let me just give you I think Iowa is always a counter-cyclical state. If you look at its history over the last 40 years, it tends to vote against whichever regime is in office. And now it moved against the Democrats under Obama, at least in the midterm level, and it's going to move against Trump for the same reason. Republicans could lose a couple seats there.
Interesting. The president is really ramping up his schedule over the next week, or a few days that we have left, kind of doing 2-a-days on the campaign trail, campaigning for candidates. The big question I have, and I was just in Scranton, Pennsylvania last weekend covering a Republican district, a district that voted for Trump but also voted for a Democrat for Congress. One of those split districts, those kind of Democrats and Trump country.
12 Trump Democratic districts.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was talking to some Trump voters there who said that they probably wouldn't show up in the midterm because Trump wasn't on the ticket. Yeah. And I asked, if the president says vote for this Republican, would you? And they said, well, sometimes I don't trust Republicans, but I trust Trump. So, we saw in 2014 and 2010 that President Obama wasn't really able to transfer his support down ballot. That's and exactly we saw that over the course of 8 years, Democrats hemorrhaged seats across the country. Can you kind of get into this dynamic a little bit with Donald Trump? Is there a potential for it to be different this time around? Again, I know we're working with kind of 2 different maps here, but the ability for a president to transfer power down ballot, what is that like, and how difficult is it?
Let me give you some top lines that I think help define the mood of the electorate and the Trump effect. On Inauguration Day, President Trump had the support of 89% of Republicans. Today, he has the support of 88% of Republicans. So there's no fall off there. They're with him. He was right when he said, I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I'll get votes. On that segment of the electorate, he was right. On Inauguration Day, Trump had the support of, I think, 12 or 14% of Democrats. He's now down to 6% of Democrats. They're not going to move the needle in any of these districts. This is a fight for the middle. So when you talk about the effect of President Trump going into a media market, he's not going to, we may disagree on this, I mean, he's not really going to be able to move the needle with those Republicans, right? He's not going to move the needle with the Democrats. They're already voting against him. The issue is with independents. And what's happened with self-described independents? On Inauguration Day, President Trump had the support of 45% of independents. Today, he has the support of 34% of independents. That's been the most measurable decrease in his support. The risk that I think he takes when he goes into a media market is he may remind his base to vote. Mm-hmm. He may remind Democrats to vote, but he's also reminding independents to vote. And independents in midterm elections like to put a check on the other party, particularly in this cycle.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Okay. I'd say you do have Trump-centric voters. When he goes into Montana, I think it helps. You know, when you take a look at the overall electorate and his margins in a state like Montana, in a state like West Virginia, I think he helps get the vote out. If you look where they're sending him, it's select areas, not sending him into suburban Chicago. That would be a disaster. So they're sending him to these rural areas that he's still pretty strong in to try to drive the vote out. Just note one other thing. We can get into a discussion on this. Nobody's talking about it, but look, the Mueller report's going to be coming out probably sooner than later. 3/4 of the Democratic base today think that Trump ought to be impeached. Mueller's report is not likely to help the president. And, you know, how do they handle it? You notice they have never mentioned it. And they don't mention it because they don't want to give these Trump people a word to come out. Republicans went through this in '98 with Clinton. And in a midterm where we should have picked up a dozen seats, we ended up losing 5 or 6 seats because we got these voters out, oh, you're trying to undo the election. So Democrats, I think, are being very disciplined on that issue. What happens after the election, after Mueller report, I think will depend on what's in the report. But I think they're going to be very pressured at that point by their base to do something.
And actually, I've heard that I've heard more of Republican candidates bring up impeachment this cycle
That's right. Now you
than
know
Democrats.
why. Now you know why.
As you know, you may not like everything that we're doing, but do you want chaos the next few years? And that would be kind of an appeal to independents. I'm wondering, you know, we're just a few more minutes before we take questions from you all. What are some things that could surprise us this cycle that you're looking for?
I mean, I'm surprised every day.
Well, I think you'll see. I think these governor's races are basically on their own track.
Yeah.
So you take a state like South Dakota. South Dakota's the state that's had the longest. It's been 40 years since they've had a Democratic governor. Could elect a Democratic governor this time. Yeah. Republican governors in Vermont and Massachusetts and Maryland will be reelected handily. But I think Oklahoma Republicans have a difficult race there. I think they're ahead. Kansas, you're going to see some surprises in these Oregon, the Democratic held. That's the state that's gone the longest without electing a Republican governor. After a while, the change bubbles up, and I think I would look at these governor's races for some surprises on election night.
And you know, I'm going to
don't know where it'll come, but I think you're going to see it.
I'll give you a cop-out. I'll do some surprises through a rear-view mirror. At the beginning of the cycle, nobody believed that Bill Nelson was really going to be in as much trouble as he is. He's got a tough race. Tester looks solid. He's less solid. Bredesen in Tennessee, I won't mention names, but a prominent United States Senator from New York was willing to bet me that Bredesen was going to be a pretty easy victory. That's tight. That's tightened. Okay. And finally, I think, I know Tom went through this and I went through this. You always have these black swan events that you just can't anticipate. And there's going to be, I do believe, I can't tell you where it's going to be, but there's going to be a district that pops, that flips, that nobody believed was going to flip. In my case, it was Tom Reed's district on the southern tier of New York, where I wouldn't put a penny into that race because it was inconceivable that the Democratic candidate would win. And the Democratic candidate came within something like 2,000 votes of beating Congressman Tom Reed. My fault that he lost because I wouldn't put any money in. That was a black swan event. We didn't see it coming. Did you have any of those districts?
Yeah, oh yeah. You don't like to talk about them. And the other thing we need to understand is the Democrats are awash in money this time.
Yeah.
So that even their second and third tier seats A lot of Republicans have spent their whole careers doing one thing, running against Barack Obama. They give that speech this year like nobody's listening.
Yeah.
And you're going to find some surprises in these House races where Democrats have run disciplined campaigns and Republicans the last week or two find out, oh, this isn't working anymore. So I think that's another problem Republicans have going into this.
I agree. And I think just to bring that forward a little bit, the biggest shock I think Democrats have had is the amount of money that their candidates have raised, just to expand on that. We always, when I chaired DCCC, we would outraise the Republicans, the NRCC, month after month, quarter after quarter, cycle after cycle. But I knew and they knew that in the last 2 weeks, Republican super PAC money would come in and just wipe us off our feet, and that's exactly what happened. It's not going to happen in this cycle because Democrats have just front-loaded their money. They buy time at a cheaper rate than these super PACs. These super PACs will not be able to use that money at the end in order to stun Democrats.
You can't even buy time. I mean,
That's
you
right.
can't even buy digital in some of these areas now.
So
They're just so
saturated.
overbought. So what do? You got a $500,000 comes in the last week. You just hire people on the ground to knock on doors. There's not much else you can do.
Yeah.
So we have one more question. I know that we're not exactly through 2018 yet, so it's a little early, but never too early because 2020 starts next Wednesday, at least in my profession.
right.
Sorry.
Truer words were never
Your
spoken.
airwaves are never going to be clear.
Yeah.
What kinds of things are you looking for on election night that will help kind of shape what we're looking forward to or not looking forward to in 2020? And I ask that too because while it is very early, you know, the president is campaigning in a lot of states that will be very that he needs to do well in for his own ambitions. And we also have lots of Democrats already in Iowa, already in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
It's starting.
I don't look at. Had you asked me 4 years ago and mentioned Donald Trump as the Republican nominee, I would have just dismissed it out of hand. So talk about a black swan event. I mean, this was you know, who knows? I just add with the rapidity of change going on across the globe and the growth of these third parties, and I mean, who knows where this is going to take us 2 years from now. You could get a third party movement. Democrats are going to have a field day. Trump could have a challenge within the party. We don't know what Mueller. There's so many variables out there. But as, you know, as I look at election night, one thing I look at is let's assume the Democrats take the House, which I think is a better than 50-50 chance, probably a better than 70-30 chance. But let's assume that happens. How big is their margin?
Yeah.
And what is the pressures that do? Does Nancy Pelosi walk into the speakership, or do they look as bad as the Republicans when they got the majority and couldn't decide who the speakers, and they couldn't muster a majority for these issues? A referendum on Trump is one thing, but you put Trump up against Pickett, Elizabeth Warren, or whatever, it's a different race altogether. How you play off against that House majority. When we took the majority in '94, our leadership thought Bill Clinton was dead. He played off us. I'll give you the example. My voters in Northern Virginia in 1994 elected me to protect them from Bill Clinton, and 2 years later they re-elected Clinton to protect them from me. I mean, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Look, I think that this midterm it's going to be hard to take a look at the results and clearly decipher what it means for 2020 for this reason. Both sides are going to proclaim victory. The Democrats will proclaim victory in the House. The Republicans will proclaim victory in the Senate. Donald Trump will say this is the largest mandate that a president has ever received in the history of elections and proclaim victory and then say it's fake news that the Democrats won in the House. So it's going to be difficult. Let me take the reverse of that. If something catastrophic happens to my party and we don't take control of the House, I think that's hardly possible. But I also was on a panel like this at the New York Times on election night 2016 when the polls closed and I proclaimed Hillary Clinton as the next president. So maybe my predictive abilities aren't that good. But if my party suffers some kind of catastrophe, what that would mean is a repudiation of moderate Democrats. For us to lose, it means that our moderate Democratic candidates in Pennsylvania, in Kansas, in Iowa, in Nevada, and elsewhere will have been repudiated, which empowers the left in my party and empowers presidential candidates from the left. And that, I think, begins to define the climate for Democrats going into 2020. I don't think that will happen.
All right, well, we'd like to open it up to you all, and we've been told to take our first 3 questions from students, if possible. I believe there are some mics going around. Oh, right there. Perfect.
Congressman, thank you so much for your sharing. I've always found your IOP seminars to be very insightful. And Caitlin, I just wanted to say I watch Red and Blue every day, so this is a great pleasure. I have 2 questions, one for each of the congressmen. Congressman Israel, I owe you a question. What are the 4 convergences of Trump? Would you be able to share on that? And as to Congressman Davis, when Hillary lost the presidential election 2 years ago, everyone said that the Democratic Party had to undergo a period of soul-searching, which is sort of still going on, and in 6 months' time, we're going to see a very crowded field. One way or another, President Trump is going to leave the White House at some point. My question is, maybe he might get reelected, but unless he rewrites the Constitution on that front, he is going to leave at some point.
He might do that by executive order.
I was trying to be nonpartisan there, but my question is, would you be able to...
Just kidding for the record. Yeah. I got to go back to Washington. Okay.
Yeah. I wanted you to I want to gauge your thoughts on the future of the Republican Party. Where is the party going to head after Trump? And I honestly don't know who might emerge as his successor. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll tick off the 4 convergences. We talked about this in one of our seminars. I was asked to try and figure out what happened to Hillary Clinton and why Trump won. And this is a half-an-hour deal that I'm going to boil into less than 1 minute. What we learned from some extensive voter research was that Donald Trump could have only won in 2016. He probably couldn't have won in 2014. He wouldn't have won in 2018. He only could have won in 2016 because there were 4 socioeconomic convergences bearing down on the electorate. One was a radically changing economy. People talked about the fact that the Radio Shack in my neighborhood disappeared, the Borders to Barnes & Noble. I used to take a taxi, now I have to do this thing called Uber. I don't know what that means. So an economic alienation. People were afraid of their economic survival, or they feared whether they could survive economically. The second was historic breakdown of faith in institutions across the board, whether it's sports, or the church, or Wall Street, or the media. People felt untethered from institutions, which is why Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump really had the best messaging in the primary. The third was the highest level of fear that we had ever seen in voters, whether it was Ebola, or ISIS beheading, or getting shot in a movie theater. People were genuinely afraid. And the fourth was the sense that democracy no longer mattered in our country. We would do focus groups and say to people, what about climbing the ladders of opportunity? What about, America being a beacon of hope and democracy for the world? It was a laugh line. People just didn't buy it. You put those 4 convergences together, Donald Trump appeared at the perfect time. Final point on this. There's a great saying in the Navy, take your eyes off the radar and look out the window. Hillary Clinton had her eyes on the radar and the data. Donald Trump opened the window, was listening and watching what was happening outside the window. He picked up those anxieties.
Yeah, Donald Trump did reality TV every year for like 11 years. I don't think Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush or John Kasich, I was a Kasich, I don't think they ever watched that. I don't think they had any connection to these people out here that everybody else was ignoring. The argument written was Hispanic voters put Clinton in office. The media missed it. This is the stuff, they call it the flyover country for a reason as you walk through. Now, I don't know what's going to happen on the Democratic side. They will decide what kind of party they're going to be over the next 2 years. We had our Tea Party. They have the Herbal Tea Party over there moving. And we don't know who. They got so many candidates. I don't know how this focuses out. My gut is if they stay centered, they can win this thing back.
Agreed.
If they become a progressive party, this becomes completely different, and we just no telling what can happen. As for my party, I want to see what happens with Mueller. What happens. I don't give it a given that Republican senators wouldn't vote to convict, given what's happened. I've talked to a number of them. There's no love lost between most of these members in the White House. Their problem is their voters love the president. And so they're going to pay attention to that. But at the end of the day, I had one member say, you know, I put my career on the line if that's what it takes. This has been a hostile takeover to a great degree. The Republican Party has never been a populist party. We've been a much more establishment party. We've paid a price for that. We're losing Winnetka now, and we're losing the south side of Chicago. What kind of coalition is that the Democrats are putting together? It's basically an anti-Republican coalition. So we're going to have to regroup after Trump and decide where we go and what we do, and a lot of it will depend on what the Democrats offer in opposition. Coalitions are not static. They are constantly changing. I've shown you in that first map the movement of the Republican Party from the country club to the country. I don't think you put that, I think that stays to some extent, but to get to 50% in this country, you're going to have some dissonance in your coalition. We clearly have to attract more people, more non-white voters to the party. We have a lot of immigrants whose value structure, whether it's their super patriotism, their entrepreneurship, the cultural conservatism, would be natural Republicans if we could ever get beyond the immigration. We did an autopsy of our party after we lost in 2012 that said exactly that. And what happened? Trump ignored it and got elected. So, but I think over the long term, the Republican Party has to move in that direction and focus more on some of the economic issues.
The Democratic debate stage in 2020 is going to be very, very big.
Very wide.
Multiple iterations. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Natasha Mata, and I'm a second year in the Harris School of Public Policy. I wanted to get both of your opinions on two races. One in Texas, where Beto O'Rourke is certainly someone who has raised so much money, but the polls still show that Ted Cruz seems to be in the lead. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and how Ted Cruz has such a hold on the state, and also if you think, like, what's the future of the Democratic Party in Texas, and also a little more up to date about Steve King in Iowa. I know, you know, he's racist, xenophobic, supremacist, but there are a lot of Republican candidates who are like that, including the one on the top, and it seems to not be hurting him, but he's the one losing, you know, supporters and funding at this very late point. So I just wanted to get your viewpoint.
You want to do King, and I'll do Texas?
Yeah, let me start with King. I mean, the national media has called him all these things, but people in northwestern Iowa, which is the most conservative part of the state, they know Steve King. And you know, he's hung around there for years, and they agree with him on a lot of this stuff. So the fact that the party won't fund him, they never fund him anyway. So I think what Steve Stivers was saying is he didn't want his national donors to not give to the party because we've been through this before where you've had some candidate goes out and says something stupid, and the Democrats try to make this representative of the Republican Party. Steve King is not representative of the Republican Party. He's representative of his congressional district, where they have elected him many, many times, and these issues have come up before, and he's had a lot stronger candidates against him than he has this year. So I know Steve King, you know, very well. He believes this stuff, unlike a lot of people who will say whatever comes into their mind. He clearly, I think, was strayed from the message he should have been saying, and if he thought about it. But I think he's going to be reelected at this point. I think the fact they're not giving him any money was more to the national donors and to the national image of the party.
And I think in Texas, if Beto were running anywhere but Texas, he'd be a shoo-in. And maybe he'll be on that elongated stage in 2020. I think Texas just has its own Republican gravity. And I think it's more uphill for Beto in Texas than it would be almost anywhere else.
Yeah, let me just add that. We talked about the country moving apart. Clearly, Dallas County, Harris County, Bayer County, these urban counties in Texas have been moving to the Democrats. Mm-hmm. But these rural areas, you've got county after county gave over 80% of the vote for Trump. They're going to show up there. I mean, Beto is a much more likable figure than Ted Cruz. I think we can all agree on that. But this is a conservative state to the core, and I'm looking at the early voting. The other thing that we don't think about in Texas is you got one button you can push and it votes straight party. Yeah. And that will help some urban Democrats running in a couple of congressional states. But statewide, that helps Cruz, and I think he's going to win.
There's a governor's race there, too.
And the Republican governor's going to win comfortably. That helps.
Yeah.
That lifts up all Republicans.
Hi, thank you all for the time tonight. My name is Andrew Hyman. I'm a second year at the Booth School of Business. And I have a question about electoral reform specifically. So before there was a blue wave, there was a blue wall. And then sometime around November 2016, people, especially from the left, started talking about pretty radical electoral reform. Specifically, I've heard about abolishing the Electoral College. I've heard some people say abolishing the Senate, but I don't think that's a very widespread view, believe it or not. But
Can we abolish just certain senators?
Well, some people talk
if
about
Republicans hold the House, that'd be okay.
but people are talking about incorporating Puerto Rico and D.C. as states, and even maybe breaking up California to try and get a few more liberal senators in play. I'm curious about your thoughts on proposing electoral reforms like that in the wake of a loss where it seems transparently political, and then your thoughts on some systemic reforms more broadly and what you think would be sort of helpful first.
I would say, with all the respect in the world, of all of those proposals kind of veer from no way to never. It's just not going to happen. The one area that I think we've got to address is gerrymandered districts. 2012, Democratic House candidates received nearly 1.7 million more votes than Republican House candidates, and we can only pick up 8 seats because of gerrymandering. Now, Tom, I think will add to that and talk about the fact that our populations are beginning to sort culturally and demographically. But when you have a popular vote for president and now popular votes for members of Congress that consistently favor one party, but that party consistently loses those House elections and presidential elections, there's a problem there. Now, I will tell you that the Democrats have decided that will be one of the issues that they're going to talk about in the opening days of the next Congress. They're going to talk about lowering the price of prescription drugs. They're going to talk about building paychecks by building infrastructure. They're going to talk about electoral reform and ethical reform, and the electoral reform is going to focus on fair districts.
Yeah, the difficulty on electoral reform, and when the Republicans take it, first thing gets voter ID, Democrats take it, you get felony voting, mail-in ballots. There are discussions we can have on this, but they're never adult discussions. It's always, does this benefit my party or not? And that's the problem. I was the sponsor of DC voter rights in the House, and I got it through the House with 23 Republicans. Steve, of course, supported on that. Even though we knew that was a Democratic vote, it's the capital of the free world, they have a voting in Congress. But I can tell you the resistance in my conference, because it's a Democratic city, was why are you doing this, Davis? You were campaign chairman, and that the resistance to this is everybody's going to look at how does this affect us politically. And so I think that's the difficulty with this as we move on. I agree with him on redistricting. I think this stuff's gotten way out of hand. I don't think the court should do it, but where you have referendums, citizens ought to move in. I just think it's a better policy all the way through. Let me just add one other thing, lay out some controversy. 3 factors have led to these single-party districts. The fact is, most members, the only race that counts is their primary election. Right. So their time, their attention, their voting records to primary voters who tend to be left on the Democratic side and right. It's not really a representative group. And those of us in the middle, we're stuck with who gets nominated, not always the best choices. 3 factors have brought this together. One is residential sorting, second is gerrymandering, and third is the Voting Rights Act. In the Deep South, all you have in the House are white Republicans and black Democrats, and no reason to talk to the other side because these districts are so moved that they play no role in the nomination process. And I think we have to have adult conversations sometimes about what's best for the country and how do we handle these things directly, because these single-party districts basically turned us into parliamentary politics. Right. It's not a good thing.
Hello, my name is Miles Kornfeld, and I'm a second year in the college. My question is about the Democrats' novel appeal to emotion mentioned earlier. Does this shift of Democrats appealing to emotion and not policy represent a new generation of Democrats running, or does this change represent established Democrats changing their campaign tactics? Furthermore, sorry.
Don't filibuster.
How will this appeal to emotion by both Democrats and Republicans affect the way legislature is passed?
This is a fascinating topic, and it should be the subject for our next gathering. There's a lot of work being done on political messaging and how the brain processes that message. And as I said before, Republicans generally have succeeded by messaging to the amygdala. This is where our emotions reside. This is where fear and flight is, our fear instincts. And Democrats have messaged to the prefrontal cortex. I'm really simplifying this, by the way. So I apologize to any neuroscientists. The fact that I can even say the word dorsolateral prefrontal cortex would make my mother very proud. Which is why, I mean, you take a look at some of the ads. In fact, let's use a case study. We looked at this ad today, the Tennessee race, Tennessee Senate race. 30-second spot, Republican spot. The caravan is coming. Caravan is coming, and footage of the caravan, really unflattering footage of this caravan. 15,000 people coming to storm our borders. And then you have an interview with Phil Bredesen. And what does he say? Well, actually, it's 5,000 people, and they're 3,000 miles away, so they're not really a security threat. Wrong message, man. Wrong message. He's appealing to people's sense of reason. Voters are not reasonable. They're emotional. He's the exception to the rule. I think this midterm is creating a new tactical shift for Democrats because they have learned to appeal to people's emotions. They're doing it more through anger. Republicans are doing it more through fear. We'll see whether fear or anger wins this midterm.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a first year in the college. During the special elections and the off years, we saw a lot of the time hyperbole about how it was a referendum on Trump. It was showing us exactly which way the country was moving. Do you think there are any races this year that actually can show us anything like that, that are kind of watermarks for the country to see which way it's going?
I like the House races in general when you look at it. Look, as I said, the country's moving in different, it continues to move apart. It's not just moving in one direction. I think Rahm Emanuel said it was a blue wave with a red undertow. Yeah. So it's moving in different parts. The one thing Democrats have is that they got a ton of money, they're competitive. There are some districts in North Carolina that they ordinarily had left alone. They're going after this time. They all have urban pieces to them around Charlotte and Raleigh. So you look at those kind of, in Texas, you've got those seats, you've got a seat around Dallas and a seat around Houston that they're trying to be competitive. If Democrats win those, I think it signals a new day for them in terms of being able to compete in regions they haven't. But don't understand this as a wave. This is a midterm election. Midterm elections are midterm elections. They're not determinative of anything over the long term. If they were, Obama wouldn't have gotten reelected, Clinton wouldn't have gotten reelected. You have to put it in that perspective.
Agree.
Hi there, I'm Gray. I'm a first year in the college. So Congressman Israel, you represented the New York district. I'm from New York. I'm from, not from your district, but Manhattan.
I've heard of it.
And so that's, you know, it's a fairly liberal place, I guess.
Yeah.
Trump's home county.
That's right.
That's right, yeah.
We're not proud of that one. Yeah, so
He got 10% of the vote there.
That was Staten Island.
No,
they're culturally New Jersey.
You know they Richmond County. No. Wow.
Anyway, so the state is, we've been talking a lot about the divide between urban and rural vote, the urban and rural vote, and New York is a great example of that. New York has the biggest city in the country, one of the more liberal cities in the country, and then upstate, it's pretty deeply conservative the further you get up there. So without, as Congressman Davis was saying, like without like the massive like relocation, like Democrats moving into rural areas to vote there, without that sort of drastic solution, how do Democrats reach out to the more rural areas, and conversely, how do Republicans reach to the more urban areas?
So Democrats are reaching out to the more rural areas. I think the most likely flip in New York State is going to be in upstate New York, Rome, Utica, where you have Congresswoman Claudia Tenney is likely to be defeated, in my view, by Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi. Brindisi's messaging is a rural message. He's disassociated from some of the more conventional Democratic platforms. He's talking about his independence. And so I think that's an example of an upstate district that's likely to flip. By the way, that district, Tom and I were talking about this before, that district was held for over 20 years, by 30 years, by a very moderate Republican, Sherry Boehlert, then flipped to a conservative Democrat, Mike Arcuri, then flipped to a liberal Republican, Richard Hanna, who endorsed Hillary Clinton in 2016 and has now endorsed Anthony Brindisi, a moderate Democrat. Those are the kinds of districts that my party has to begin winning and winning more of in order to sustain any kind of success. The other district that we have a shot at flipping, I think, in New York is the John Faso district. The Democrat there is Delgado. It's a fascinating district because it's rural, but it's also where a lot of New York City folks have their weekend homes.
Hudson.
Right, Hudson,
yeah,
right, Hudson, Rockland.
Yeah, I know those
So we may have a shot at that. Interestingly, I don't think that we really have a shot at the two Long Island Republican districts, Peter King or Lee Zeldin, although the Zeldin race is now within 3 points. Perry Gershon is within 3 points. I think in those kind of quintessentially purple suburban districts, we're not going to win those, but we will win the more districts, more upstate, more rural.
Let me just say this. If the Democrats go the progressive route, it changes everything. Look, Republicans they got Arkansas and West Virginia, two rock-solid Democratic states, now rock-solid Republicans, and the price of that's Orange County and Fairfax. There's always a yin and a yang to this business. You want to get those voters, you're going to have to give up something to get them on guns or something and lose part of the constituency. There are trade-offs wherever you go. Just understand it.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm an alumnus, and I really appreciate you guys being here this evening. My issue has to do with wealth inequality and the fact it's been growing since the 80s. And it's a serious problem. It's, in my view, potentially an existential threat to our democracy and to the democracy of many Western countries. The tax bill that was passed clearly exacerbates that. And it's an emotional issue. Why is it that, at least from the Democratic side, all we hear about is health care, and we don't hear about this incredibly important issue of growing wealth inequality? They potentially elected Donald Trump.
I'll give you an answer that will antagonize you, but it's the honest answer because I've not seen any single poll in this midterm election where the issue of income inequality comes even close to voters' top concerns. It's health care, it's different forms of security. It just doesn't score points in polls. And if you're messaging on an issue that doesn't resonate back home, you're messaging the wrong issue. I agree with you substantively, but politically, I just don't think it's a winning issue for Democrats in most districts.
And look, the tax bill was basically aimed at cutting corporate income tax to stop these inversions. And since most businesses file as individuals, not as corporations, they had to take care of that. You can play fun with numbers on this. We can talk about the SALT tax, the effect that has on certain areas, but I don't think it was a disaster Democrats think it was.
Hi, my name is William Olson. I'd like to ask you both to share your thoughts upon the matter of Jefferson Sessions and the election spending.
Meaning, I'm sorry, can you elaborate?
Would you share your thoughts upon the matter of Attorney General Jefferson Sessions and how his appointment relates to the pending elections?
I'm not sure I have an opinion.
Yeah, I think he's been a pretty decent Attorney General. You may like or not like the judges. That comes from the White House. I think he's been pretty independent. He's obviously, he's no longer, he and President Trump are no longer as close as they were.
I believe he's committed a crime against humanity at our southwest border. I believe he has, under the color of law, treated persons in our country cruelly and inhumanly.
What's he done?
You're familiar with the forcible separations of families at our southwest border?
Yeah, that's DHS.
You're familiar with his engineering and superintending of the policy known as zero tolerance?
Well,
No?
you had asked about campaign. I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. I thought you asked about the relationship between campaign finance and Sessions.
Yeah, that's why I heard it.
But
I'm sorry if I
totally
wasn't
respect
clear.
your opinion.
No, I was speaking of the results of the elections in general and the appointment of Jefferson Sessions as Attorney General.
I think it's a Homeland Security issue more than a Justice Department issue, just for whatever it's worth. That's a DHS issue in terms of how you handle that.
Next.
Andrew Wise. I'm a first-year student at Harris, and my question, I guess, kind of follows from one earlier. On the issue of electoral reform, I guess this is kind of a two-pronged question. But on that issue, do you see more progress to the extent that we make any being made more on a state level than a federal level? Well, such as on the issue of say, redistricting or the Voting Rights Act, and also how much can we expect the current Supreme Court to stand in the way? I'm thinking of the Arizona redistricting case 3 years ago, where the legislature challenged the constitutionality of the voter referendum approved independent commission, which was upheld on a 5-4 vote, but that five justice majority included Justice Kennedy, who is now gone.
Well, I think that's the precedent now. Look, election laws have always been at the state level. Congress does have the authority on redistricting to mandate commissions, but they're not going to do that. The members who benefit from one set of rules are loath to change those rules. That's been my experience, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. So you're going to see the innovations at the state level. I just add that that's probably a good thing. I mean, the new states' rights groups are no longer Alabama and Mississippi. It's California and Hawaii and Massachusetts with Trump in the White House. Do you really want this nationalized through the Justice Department, or do you want to allow the states to continue to be these laboratories of democracy and write their own rules? That's a more fundamental question.
Most electoral reforms are happening at the state level. My number may be off, but I think there are about 21 states that have some measure of independent redistricting, whether it's a commission or any other mechanism.
Some criteria, something.
Florida has fair districts, so a legal standard or a political standard. I think there are about 21 states that are doing that. If you take a look at fundamental campaign finance reform around the country, Congress has done nothing on it, but states, both Republicans and Democrats, or Democratic states, are in that space. I think you're going to see many more states begin to enter that space and pursue those reforms in the near future.
Let me just add one thing. I was a floor manager against McCain-Feingold. I said at the time, it's wonderful to try to get this evil soft money away from candidates and parties. Yeah. But where do you think this money's going to go? You think this money's just going to disappear? The end result, it has moved the money from parties, which have been a centering force in American politics, out to these super PACs on the right and left that play in primary elections. And I think interest groups are more powerful today than forever. Now, you can look at a couple court cases, Speech Now case, and argue it that way. These were foreseeable, but I'm just saying, Congress, don't look for Congress to make these changes. I'm not sure that they know what they're doing.
Hi, my name is Jeremiah. I'm a first year at the college. Both of you spoke about Democrats having problems turning out Hispanic voters, and I was wondering, like, what you guys think they should do to, like, increase turnout. And considering that turnout has been low for so long, do you think the Democrats will have to change their position on immigration in order to be successful in future elections?
Every single Democratic member of the House of Representatives over the past several Congresses was prepared to vote on comprehensive immigration reform along the lines of the McCain bill. So Democrats are not going to step back from that position. What I find interesting is that stalwart, indefatigable position on immigration has not yet translated into increased and intense support among Latinx voters. I don't know why that is. Maybe you have a theory. I haven't been able to crack that.
Well, I mean, they don't all look. Trump did better among Hispanic voters than Romney. Mm-hmm. Not everybody. That's not the issue to every immigrant voter. Is immigration. A lot of the ones that are here legally have other concerns, across the board. I do think this. With a Democratic House, I think you're going to get a DACA bill out of the House. Yeah. The votes were there in the last Congress, but the Republican leadership was scared of bringing it up because you had part of their caucus threaten to take down the speaker if he did it. I think if they pass it, I think the Senate's likely to pass a legislative fix, which I think should have happened a long time ago. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think what's interesting too, when I was in Miami, you heard a lot of Republicans there from Cuba, Venezuela. It depends on where you have come from. That really identified with the Republican Party, especially as they thought that Democrats were. You hear Trump all the time saying, "Let's not turn into Venezuela." That kind of thing resonated with people. So just proof that it's not a monolithic.
Well, look, we all get our news different ways. If I watch MSNBC every night, I'm going to walk away thinking this is the way the world is. If you watch Fox every night, your head is just a different. I mean, frankly, these
you
are.
Just have to watch CBS.
CBS News is good. I think. No, I think it is. It's got guardrails on it. It doesn't just harangue the full time. This other stuff is. Look, how do most people get their news now? They get it right here. Folks, the crap to content ratio coming over this is just exceptionally high. We're all walking around in bubbles like we know what's going on, and I don't know what's fake or not on this stuff. I just know we know enough to hear a lot of stuff coming out of here that is just. It's crazy on both sides because that's their business models. People tune in to get their worldviews validated, and they get fed this stuff all the time. Immigration is a very nuanced issue. It's a very nuanced issue, and Congress should have dealt with it 20 years ago. Maybe we got an opportunity to do it now with the Democratic House. Whatever they put, the Senate will modify it a little bit and get it off the table. That's the best thing for the Republicans is to get this issue off the table.
Can I make a quick closing comment on this issue? I'll tell you what I worry about the most as we enter the last 55 seconds, and we haven't talked about it. There's been a complete implosion of civic engagement in this country. We've got tribalized media. We've got tribalized districts. We now have tribalized stores, Cracker Barrel versus Whole Foods. We have become such a tribalized nation. You talk about brain science. Really, our brain circuitry is becoming more red and more blue. And there's nothing that's grounding us anymore. I just saw a statistic like 40% of high school students, fewer than 40% of high school students can name all 3 branches of government. 78% can name all 3 stooges. 12% of Americans believe the Bill of Rights includes the right to own a pet. Now, you may say, okay, it's only 12%. It's the frickin' Bill of Rights, right? So, and I know Chicago is in this space doing civic engagement. The smartest thing we can do, and there's not a bill in Congress, you get Republicans like Davis and Democrats like me and others to take some national leadership for restoring civic virtue to America. And this tribalism will begin to dissipate as people come back to some basic and agreed upon consensus and truths.
Well, I think you guys are forging the path and proving that Democrats and Republicans can get along and have a nice discussion. So
He's not so bad after all.
Yeah.
For a Republican.
By the way, the Republicans never thought he was a Republican.
But I delivered him victories.
That's right.
There you go. Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for being here.